hard hatch door today. Authorities there say the hatch appears to be, for the most part, intact. And there are several other developments coming out of NASA. CNN's Brian Cabell has been working the story all weekend. He joins us from the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Brian, good day to you.
Good evening to you, Aaron. The Accident Investigation Board here in Houston is back in town after having the weekend off. And in the days and weeks ahead, they are going to be very busy traveling and working. One thing in particular that they're going to be looking at here over the next several days is an observation made by an Air Force tracking station 24 hours into the launch. What that tracking station saw was an object moving away from the shuttle. They don't know what that object was. It may have been a piece of space debris or junk. It may have been a piece of the shuttle coming off. It may have simply been a chunk of ice. They simply don't know at this point. But what makes that particularly intriguing is that back in 1997, an independent engineering study concluded that the chances of a piece of debris colliding with the shuttle and causing catastrophic damage, failure of the shuttle, was about 1 in 200, and that at that time was ruled an acceptable risk by NASA. The board, of course, also interested in the debris that continues to be collected, as you indicated, in both Texas and Louisiana. A wing part they still have not identified as either being from the left wing or the right wing, but that is very interesting to them. That was found in the Dallas-Fort Worth area just a couple of days ago. Other debris, we're told, is up to 20 feet long, and as you indicated, a wheel well door also has been found. They think it's a wheel well door. All of this going to the Kennedy Space Center, some of it already in process. The rest will be going in the days and weeks ahead. There they will try to reassemble the shuttle, and that will be a difficult task, according to the NASA Administrator, Sean O'Keefe.
Well, how much we're actually going to be able to reconstruct is something we'll know once we get all the pieces together, but there's certainly no way we're going to be able to reconstruct it. The pieces are just absolutely mangled.
The Accident Investigation Board, as I say, is now back in town over the next couple of days. They will be talking to NASA staffers and officials. They will then be going to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. They will be going to the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, and also to a production facility in Louisiana. So, Aaron, as I say, they have a very busy next several days ahead of them, and they have a lot of questions before them as well. Aaron?
Let me throw you one quick question. If you can answer it, do. If not, walk away from it. Why is it so difficult to identify which side of the shuttle this large wing came from, or wing piece came from?
That's a question we've been asking here, and frankly, we don't know, and perhaps they do know. They simply aren't telling us that at this point. But we're told that the tiles are individualized, so they should be able to identify which wing, but so far they have not told us which side. We expect to get that answer, frankly, in the next day or two.
Brian, thank you. Brian Cabell in Houston reporting on the shuttle tragedy, now a week old. As we continue from Kuwait, waiting for war, and that is absolutely the move.
Some of what you think about coverage of the Columbia disaster, and some of what we think. Here is an email we got from Raj Bauer of Mason, Michigan. This is a great tragedy, but how often can you repeat what happened and speculate why it happened when there just isn't much information yet? When is enough enough?
I think this is a point well made. There's a lot of news, there's a lot of time, there's very little news, and I think there's a pattern that develops. You get news, you get chatter, and then you get therapy, which comes very close to exploitation.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I think there's another danger, and that's that this has become a very familiar television program, the program of tragedy. And in fitting all events, all tragic events into this mold, I think you diminish the event itself, you make it less distinct, and you make it really into tragic wallpaper.
The reason, Jim, I don't think many of us covered it too much is that the average audience changes almost completely in cable news every 20 minutes. How can we program without taking that into account? We've got to assume that new people are coming, old people are leaving all the time. As an all-news network, we have to be all news all the time when it's a story like this, don't we?
The cable news channels are like a wire service. There's always news there. I mean, unlike in the old days when it was just the 3 broadcast channels, and they would cut away for days and days and days on a story like this, Now you could go to country music television and never see a single thing about this shuttle disaster.
And Cal, I'll tell you what you learn from executives in this business, that when a story like this breaks, because the audience is changing all the time, if you happen to tune into Fox at a point when we have gone to some other story, then that newcomer who's just come in to watch all news cable is going to leave us.
Yes, well, this was the idea behind, of course, that other network, CNN, their 24-hour news, when they started that you would always be able to tune in and not miss the headlines by just a few minutes. You could wait a few minutes and get them. Now we have the banner running underneath, and even if they're into something else, you can still get the headline news at the bottom of the screen.
So was it over coverage, Jane?
Well, I think it is. I think both things are true. I think if you watch it 24 hours, it was definitely over covered. I think what happens inevitably is you have no news, and sadly you have breaking news, live news about nothing beyond the initial tragedy, and people wanting to be close to that.
Let's hear from another of you about the coverage, too. Here's an interesting point from Dan Durrett of Beardsley, Arizona. On January 23rd, 4 Marines died in a helicopter crash. On January 30th, 4 soldiers died in a helicopter crash. On February 1st, 7 astronauts died in a space shuttle crash. What dictated the vast difference in coverage of the events?
What dictated it? Drama and video. I mean, this is a much more dramatic event, and television gravitates toward drama, as we see from the Lacey Peterson case. I mean, they love drama, and that's how this happened.
It was spectacular footage. I mean, and some of the stories I could not believe. You know, again, how close up we get. The Washington Post had a story imagining what it was like in these people's last moments.
Excuse me, Jim, but also these helicopter crashes don't call into question the future of helicopters. The shuttle crash called into question the future of space travel. So isn't it fair to say part of the reason for more coverage is a bigger issue involved?
Yes, and there are about 3 million Americans who die every year, and they all get much different coverage. It is kind of unjust, though, that these people so involved in Operation Enduring Freedom just are an afterthought. It's just unfair. It's just not much to do about it.
And the idea of the space program is an afterthought, too. I mean, first this happens, and then they start talking about the space program.
Here is what Barry Ratcliffe of Fort Walton Beach, Florida, had to say about coverage. I do not understand why you have to go into detail about what body parts have been reportedly found. Where is the respect for the families and friends?
I don't think that adds anything to the story. I agree with the writer. I mean, to hear that a torso has been found here and 3 parts of the Israeli astronaut has been found there, I think you can have some dignity in that. And I agree with the letter writer. I think you say human remains were found. I don't think you need to go into gross and graphic detail.
Why do we go into that detail, Jane? Do we think that detail of any nature makes a story more valid? Is that it?
Well, again, I think we're in a very different time. I mean, it used to be when they first had shots of Civil War soldiers dead on the battleground, people were shocked and said it was an obscenity. Now, people want to get as close to this. I think there is something morbid and almost very, very negative about people wanting to know this information. Whether we need to give it to them is another question.
It's hard to defend body parts on the air, but look, the news is hungry. It is a giant open mouth looking for things to put in it. And so we all got lessons in tiles and foam rubber and so on. You just can't really fault reporters too much for wanting to sort of absorb and then send out everything they know.
But there's another fact I want to just quickly make. Howard Kurtz in the Washington Post mentioned there was testimony that only Orlando Sentinel covered, because they're the only people where a man leaving NASA said, I'm very worried about shuttle safety. It got no coverage until this disaster.
Let's talk about golf. CNN anchor Aaron Brown did not go on the air despite being Cal Page to go on the air Saturday morning until Sunday night because he was playing in a celebrity golf tournament. If what we read in the press is true, this is a major point of contention at CNN. And frankly, something really puzzling to me. Look, all of us on the air have egos, and one of the ways we feed our egos, all of us except Cal, who started in print, is that we like to be on television. When an event of the magnitude of the Columbia disaster comes out, everybody wants to be on television. Why would somebody want to play golf that weekend who's a news anchor?
Well, the deal at CNN for years has been that the news is the news and not our personalities or anchors, as hypocritical as that may be in this business. But I think, you know, that's a functioning network, and they can function fine with him or without him. I mean, Rush Limbaugh took off 2 weeks to go play in, I think, this very golf tournament and another one as well. There are a lot of people ticked about that, but hey, it's whatever you can negotiate.
Quickly, Jim.
Well, look, CNN actually did better in the ratings than anybody thought. They actually beat Fox in the ratings. So Aaron Brown ought to think to himself, maybe they're doing better without me. That might have to do with his next contract.
That's why you don't want to do this.
One postscript, he decided not to go to the studio in Los Angeles because he didn't have the proper clothes. That tells you a lot about American journalism.
We can all identify with that.
That should have come up right away, because now he's off the hook.